quantas zonas turísticas tens. Okay, well, welcome. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our session entitled Overcoming Obstacles to School Meal Implementation, Building Resilience, Finance, and Coordination. It feels like afternoon because it's pretty hot in here. So my name is Abiola Falaya, and I am the director in the Policy and Research Institute at Bread for the World. As you heard, my CEO Eugene Cho speak earlier. Bread is a Christian organization. We're an advocacy organization urging U.S. decision makers to do all they can to pursue a world without hunger. And it's my pleasure to moderate this important conversation around school feeding. Our Policy and Research Institute, where I sit, along with my colleague Isabel Van der Molen, who's done a fantastic job helping us pull this together. In the Policy and Research Institute, we analyze the root causes of hunger, including climate change, and we educate the public and policymakers about the policy solutions to overcome these challenges. We are grateful to our hosts, the Action on Food Hub Pavilion. They've been amazing, really, from the very beginning. We know they put in a lot of work into making the hub exist, and also, even working with us as a partner. So, from the bottom of our hearts, we are very grateful to our partners. We applaud you for continuing to make space for organizations such as us at COP, where we can discuss how food systems transformation is a vital part of climate action to reach our shared goal of a resilient, prosperous, and healthy world. I also want to thank our audience members who are joining us online and folks in person. And of course, I want to thank our distinguished panelists and speakers for joining us this morning. So as I call on you, please feel free to come on stage and settle in. So first, we have Arlene Mitchell, who is the Executive Director of the Global Child Nutrition Foundation. She's going to be joining us virtually, so thank you and welcome, Arlene. And then next I have Yukiko Yamada Morovich, who's the Technical Director for Environmental Sustainability and Climate Action at World Vision International. Please join me in welcoming Yukiko. Next we have Simon O'Connell, who is the CEO of SNV. Please join me in welcoming Simon. And lastly, we have Jahan Zeb Chowdhury, who's the lead technical specialist for environment and climate at the International Fund for Agricultural Development. Thank you so much for joining us, panelists. Our earlier discussion discussed the climate and nutritional co-benefits of plant-forward diets in school meal programs. Frankly, it made a believer out of me. I think I'm gonna be eating a lot more beans and a lot more plant-based dietary items. In this session, our speakers will share the challenges of maintaining climate resilient and regenerative school meal programs and highlight their recommended solutions. School meals touch so many parts of the economy. They can create market opportunities for local agriculture, employ and provide livelihoods for workers and cooks, and invest in human capital by ensuring children, especially girls, have the nourishment they need to learn and thrive. Globally, more than 400 million children receive regular meals through school feeding programs. In 2024, these programs represented an estimated $67 billion investment in critical nutrition and food security programs, led in large part by governments, as we've heard from the prior panel that we had with our CEO, Eugene Cho. That's an enormous footprint, if you ask me. One that connects farmers, educators, scientists, nutritionists, the private sector, and policymakers in a shared ecosystem. Yet climate change and environmental stressors pose a challenge to building and maintaining effective food systems including these important school feeding operations. Making school meal programs more resilient and regenerative is a growing innovation in the field, where 38% of school meal programs were found by the Global Child Nutrition Foundation to be climate friendly. I know I fell in love with school meals when I was at the World Food Program, and I got to visit some of the operations and just was impressed by how transformative school meals are. Our goal today is to explore the challenges and highlight the solutions to implementing regenerative school meal programs that deliver better climate and nutrition outcomes. To help us unpack these questions, I'm thrilled now to turn it over to our panel of experts and practitioners who bring perspectives from nutrition research, school meal program implementation, and rural development. So without much ado, let's get right to it. Arlene, I'm going to get started with you, but I'm actually going to take a seat so that I can join the panelists. So just give me 1 second. Arlene, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello and welcome. We're so delighted to have you. And thank you for also all of your amazing work in the space of school meals. I know that aside from your current work, you actually were one of the pioneers of school feeding programs at the World Food Program. So really, it's exciting and also humbling to be able to speak with you. So I was hoping that you can paint the big picture for us on school meals and regenerative school meals. So from your extensive research and experience, can you provide examples of school meal programs that have improved resilience to climate challenges or improved their regenerative nature? And then the other question is, what are common challenges faced by school meal programs that inhibit sustainability and implementation goals? And again, thank you so much and welcome.
Thank you, Abiola. And I want to thank all the organizers for inviting me. I just wish I could be there in person. And I want to thank you, too, for giving me two very easy questions to start off with. But at the Global Child Nutrition Foundation, or GCNF, our primary resource for all questions about school meals is our very own, very comprehensive global survey of school meal programs. The data in the survey comes directly from governments and focuses on a given school year. We've conducted the survey 3 times since 2019, and our database now includes information from 167 countries that have responded to at least one of the surveys. The survey covers a long list of topics. If we could have the next slide, please. And then the next slide. There we go, a long list of topics, 3 of these that relate most directly to resilience and regenerative agriculture. Next slide. There are many options for people who are interested in what we're learning through the surveys. Just visit our website at gcnf.org. On the topic of resilience to climate change or programs involving regenerative agriculture, there are 2 extra special programs that stand out. Brazil has a very impressive national school meal program called PNAE, and Japan has a fabulous approach that combines concerns for human health with the health of the planet and has a heavy focus on school meals. Both of these programs are holistic and wonderful examples, and everyone listening should learn all you can about them. In both cases, the governments are very happy to share their experience and their data. I'll give a few other examples, but they're not quite as holistic as the 2 I just mentioned. COVID-19, for example, and the war in Ukraine triggered much more attention in almost every country to reducing food miles and developing local value chains. There are multiple examples as well of countries reintroducing traditional, neglected, and or underutilized crops suited to their ecosystems and resistant to climate change. Millets in India, for example, and elsewhere in the world. Zambia, focusing on heritage crops, and traditional crops in Latin America that are making it into school meal programs. Several countries in the European Union have procurement requirements now requiring climate smart and organic foods. And there's an international non-governmental group called ICLEI, or ICLEI, that's been promoting climate smart procurement initiatives in the EU and elsewhere, including in Africa more recently. So there are many examples in the world, but I always return to Brazil and Japan as the shining stars. On the second question about common challenges faced by school meal programs that inhibit sustainability and implementation goals, I'll turn to something that GCNF has been working on. Next slide, please. We're calling this the durability framework for school meal programs. I won't go into depth, but I'll point out that we've identified 7 intersecting gears or domains that influence whether a school meal program is durable enough to last for a few years into the future. These all have to be reasonably strong. They can vary a bit in strength over time, and the program will still be okay as long as the gears are basically able to keep turning. There are 2 gears, though, that I want to talk about now. The troublemaker gear that can either support or mess the whole thing up is unfortunately outside of the control of the program management. That's the encompassing environment. If the program is situated in a relatively safe, healthy, natural, social, political, and financial environment, attention can be given to keeping the first 6 gears turning and even improving. But if there's a problem, like a pandemic, for example, or a massive hurricane, a war, a major financial shock, if there is a big problem in this encompassing environment, then even the strongest program in the world will suffer. And 60% of programs worldwide reported in our last survey that their programs were affected by at least one emergency during the school year. If you look at low-income countries, just that group of countries, the number is 76%. 3/4 of programs are affected by emergencies. So there's that. Disaster preparedness actually has to be built into the very DNA of every school meal program if it's to survive. Another aspect we don't talk enough about is our constituencies. Going back to the STAR programs, Brazil and Japan, you can see important examples of how it can work. For example, Brazil has set up systems to talk to farmers, and this is helping them to solve value chain problems, even with small family farms. They get input from indigenous communities and find ways to use local and seasonal crops that have been neglected. Japan has an amazing program involving the children themselves. They serve the food, they clean up after their school meals, they visit local farmers. They calculate their own food waste and make plans in class to reduce their waste. Key ministries are involved, and each one understands their role and how their work fits with other work. Parents, businesses, farmers, absolutely everyone is involved. So there has to be communication, coordination, transparency, respect, and trust across constituencies. And it's very hard. But these things are inextricably linked to resilience and regenerative goals. So there's that. Constituencies need to be meaningfully involved. And I'll end on a couple of very quick thoughts. If I had a magic wand and could fix one major environmental issue related to food, school feeding, and agriculture, it would be to fix the environmentally deadly, archaic, expensive, and often corrupt transportation systems that we deal with. We can go to the moon and we can rove around and move things around on Mars, but we can't move a basket of tomatoes from a rural African farm to a market 5 kilometers away, except by having a woman carry the basket on her head and walk 5 kilometers. Every single method of vehicle use related to food, on farm and off farm, takes a toll on the environment. We are still dependent on the same basic systems that were used over 100 years ago. This is nuts, and it needs to be fixed. Now, to close, I would just invite you, next slide, please. If you're interested in these matters, these issues, we'd love to see you at our next Global Child Nutrition Forum, which will take place next November in Lusaka, Zambia. That's November 2026 in Lusaka. And last slide, please. There are always ways you can stay in touch with GCNF, and here are a few. We hope that you will, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Arlene, I don't know if you hear, but the folks in the room are applauding. Thank you for your thoughts. Just a lot of high points there. We have about a year now to join you at your event that's happening next year, so we have enough time to plan ahead and plan hopefully to be there. But your last point around the hardships of transporting food to markets and the challenges around there really kind of hit home for me, because when my team and I were in Nairobi, we visited Machakos County, and we were visiting a smallholder woman farmer, and that was one of the challenges that she actually raised. Madam Agnes, I remember her very clearly in my mind, and so I think that last point, that last poignant story, it really brings home the impact of climate change on food systems, on food security, and also on livelihoods and just our overall well-being. So thank you so much for that. Now, Yukiko, I want to turn to you to share a bit about World Vision. And again, thank you so much for joining us. World Vision International has experience implementing and supporting school meal programs around the world. And in fact, you, for our next panel that my colleague Isabel is going to be moderating, you provided a youth voice to be part of that panel, for which we're very grateful. Can you, Yukiko, talk to us about how do climate and environmental challenges impact the implementation of school meal programs and hunger? And then the other part is, what are some solutions and innovations that help make school meal programs more regenerative and resilient? And again, thank you so much and welcome.
Thank you so much. And yes? Fantastic. Thank you so much. And it was so encouraging to hear that other organizations are noticing the similar challenges. So at World Vision, in the last financial year, we reached approximately 1 million children across 20 countries through our school feeding programs. And we are working together with all the partners across the globe. So maybe next slide, please. And we noticed over the past few years some challenges in the challenges that were already identified. The supply chain disruptions and all the flooding and droughts are causing problems in the transportation challenges. So what we did was, in the last year, we are launching this Hungry Futures Index. This is an index to analyze 84 nationally determined contributions and national adaptation plans, and to assess how many of them are actually mentioning child hunger and malnutrition as problems identified in the context of climate change and climate crisis. So maybe you can move on to the next slide. So we discovered that over 95% of NDCs and NAPs do recognize hunger as an issue in the context of climate change, and therefore they do reflect that in their national climate policies and plans. However, less than 20% of them recognize child hunger and malnutrition as an issue. And we thought this was a huge policy gap because of the invisibility of children and child hunger and malnutrition in their climate action plans. And it gets even worse when it comes to child malnutrition. Very few NDCs and NAPs are mentioning this as an issue. So World Vision thought maybe that's one of the reasons as to why there aren't systematic policy changes in facilitating school meals, providing and supply chain, assuring supply chain, and then also how we can work together, different stakeholders at different supply chains. So maybe we can go on to the next slide. So this study we just started, so this Hungry Futures Index we just launched a week ago. So we want to work together. We'd like to invite other stakeholders and partners we just identify the issues at the policy level. So we would like to deepen our understanding and looking forward to further solutions. But on the anecdotal level, World Vision, we came together with young and child delegates, and they were telling us how flooding or extreme heats and droughts and extreme weathers are disrupting their days at schools. School meals are sometimes cut off. They couldn't even go to schools, and they can't concentrate and work. And as you can see, these beautiful pictures, this one is from Uganda, and we can move on to the next slides. We did identify, for example, when we have more integral program solution. This one is from Vietnam, where we have water and sanitation projects at the same time as school meals programming. We can manage to provide safe water for cooking, and we did capacity building with the school staff, teachers, and community members so that they can provide local solutions for school meals and snacks. And maybe next slide, please. And Myanmar as well, locally produced or kitchen gardens. And we also provide some environmental education among the school children so that they understand the risks and also how they can cope with climate change. Moving on to the next. So we don't want to say it's innovative solutions. I think we do know locally led solutions, what works. There's no magic solutions. And usually solutions are quite locally contextualized, small scale. And we would like to understand what would be the key to scaling up these solutions that worked. What are the success factors that we can replicate? But for example, school gardens did have some signs of hope that gave really good understanding among children and youth who are part of the local school clubs and champions for locally led adaptation and restoration works. So we would like to seek together what would be the best solutions and what worked best, and we can replicate and scale up together. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Yukiko. Yes, and thank you, audience members, for applauding a very compelling, I think, presentation on the country-specific success stories and the innovations that are happening. Really appreciated it from various regions of the world as well. And then your point around there's no one size fits all for every context. I think that's one thing that I appreciate hearing all of our panelists harping on. And then I think the other piece is the education, the capacity strengthening or the capacity building of the local actors is also really critical, literally from the children. I saw one of the quotes where the girl said that we're learning about science and food security, while being fed. I think that just shows you the transformative power of school meals and the amazing work that you're doing. So thanks for that excellent presentation. Simon, I want to kick it over to you. Thank you again for joining us. So we know SNV has deep experience implementing and supporting agricultural development and school meal programs around the world. How is SNV connecting the dots between smallholder farmer production and market linkages and school feeding programming, procurement, government, policy, ultimately contributing to better nutrition, food systems transformation, energy transition. And then more broadly, what insights do you have or have you gained about how school meals can strengthen communities, local economies, despite climate challenges? I know that's a mouthful.
Great.
So, I've just asked you to solve the world's problems, basically.
There you go. Very good. Jahan, I'm not doing any slides if you want to come back up here. Thank you. It's great to be here. It's great to be here with some, wonderful partner organizations. And Abiola, just pick up on what you said at the beginning. I think you said you love school meals, or you've been in love with school meals for a long time. In today's massively polarized world with huge cuts in official development assistance, financing, who can't be in love with enabling children to get better nutritious diets to enable them to achieve learning outcomes that benefit them and frankly benefit us all. So the power of this and the power of the narrative of this to galvanize a greater awareness of the importance of official development assistance is really, really significant. So I'll kind of touch on your question in a number of ways without going too deep into what we do at SMV. It's interesting. I was in Machakos in Kenya last week, seeing some of our regenerative agriculture and productive use of renewable energy work supported by the IKEA Foundation. We have a 10-year partnership in 4 countries, really looking at the sort of nexus areas between those two sectoral areas, and saw some fabulous things in Kenya, but also particularly in Ethiopia and Uganda. We're working on very large-scale dairy sector systems transformation work in Ethiopia. Our work over the last decade has enabled yields in milk from dairy cows going from 4 liters a day to something like 16 to 18 liters. That's really, really transformative. And I know we have a colleague from the ministry in Ethiopia with us. Thank you for joining. In Uganda, through a market systems approach, we've been working with a company called Pearl Dairy to enable 1 million children in schools there to receive better access to dairy nutrition products. We've gone further in both those 2 countries around yogurt or even probiotic yogurt. So market systems approaches are hugely, hugely important to this. Going back to Machakos, and I think we work in 6 or so counties in Kenya on that particular program, we've seen through linking productive use of renewable energy, so solar irrigation, solar household systems, biodigesters and biogas, solar cooling, to regenerative agricultural practices, we can generate, in partnership with many, many others, increases in productivity of about 30%. That's not yields, that's input versus output productivity. And if you put all of that together, what happens is you bring down, price points, and of course you generate huge climate dividends. But the challenge, and Jahan, you've heard me say this probably for about 4 years now, so forgive me, but it's great to be here with you. The challenge is the one that we keep talking about. How do we get the smaller ticket sizes, the aggregator models, to work better so that those smallholder farmers get the right forms of financing? At SMV, we're working on, very large-scale initiatives like the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development, which is a collaboration with FMO, primarily initially seed-funded by the Dutch government's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and now with the European Union's Sustainable Fund for Development Plus. That's mobilizing kind of deal sizes or ticket sizes of about 15 million euro into things like solar irrigation in Cambodia, shrimp production in the mangroves of Vietnam, a really, really precious ecosystem where we're enabling a restoration of 17,500 hectares, or solar preservation or solar cooling of horticultural produce in East Africa. But those ticket sizes don't really connect through down to the sort of school meal work that we're talking about today. So my big aha moment. So being in love with school meals, but also an aha moment has been if we think of schools more as a center for procurement, if we put them more at the kind of centerpiece for those shorter value chains around locally produced, primarily regenerative agriculture produce, if we create, and I know the previous speaker before you spoke about predictability of financing, if we can come with a greater predictability, because school meals, we want them to be predictable, right? Then we can enable financiers to come in and say, well, actually, there's a guaranteed market here. If we create the structures across smallholder farmers with a guaranteed, predictable access to market, which is a school meal, and Johan, if we aggregate those better together, then I think it's much harder to say that there isn't an investable or a bankable opportunity there. And if we go further with the bundling of regenerative agricultural practices and productive use of renewable energy, we bring down the prices. And going back to Kenya, and many other countries have much greater subsidies, but Kenya, I learned that the subsidy for synthetic fertilizer inputs is around 30%, yeah? Around 30%. If we stimulate through more regenerative practices production at a more local smallholder farmer level, and if we create policy environments that provide incentives or subsidies or guarantees around that, what happens is we bring down the cost of that finance, yeah, and we enable a more viable and sustainable supply chain through to those schools. And if we go further and look at, well, actually, you don't need to bring in so much of that fertilizer import. Well, that's FX, that's foreign currency, right? So then you alleviate some of the burden of looking to reduce your debts or your need for foreign currency. So our kind of aha now is let's strengthen those locally produced supply chains. Let's use those schools as hubs for procurement. Yes, of course, let's work with governments to try and shape and influence and then build the right policy frameworks. And I think we're getting closer to a model that can be scaled way beyond Machakos, but across the countries that the IFADs and the Breads for the World and the World Visions and the SMVs work in. So, thank you.
Yeah, and thank you so much for that analysis, Simon, because you went from sort of the micro to the macro. So what's possible in a smaller context versus what's possible in the larger context. And, you know, Arlene pointed out the success stories in Japan and Brazil, particularly, and also her durability index, you know, that sort of potpourri of things to look at to really get to what you are talking about, right? Which is how do we make school meals bankable for private investors, and frankly, make the investment case for governments as to why they need to invest, you know, in school meals. Really appreciated also the return on the human capital return on investment, right? So a well-nourished child is is a well-developed brain who becomes the Simons, the Yukikos, and the my next speaker of the world, right? So Jahan from IFAD. So kind of looking also at the human capital component in the investment case in the public sector. So Jahan, I want to segue over to you. Again, thank you so much for the partnership that BRED has with the International Fund for Agricultural Development. In fact, a couple of years ago, we took 60 faith leaders from across the continent of Africa and the Caribbean to Kenya, and IFAD really helped to facilitate some of the programs that we saw on the ground to open the eyes of our faith leaders to the impact of climate change on food security. So we really truly are grateful for your friendship and the partnership that IFAD has had with Bread for the World. So my question for you, Jahan, and again, welcome, Jahan Zep. How has IFAD supported resilient and regenerative school meals programs? And then what are the criteria that IFAD uses for establishing a school meal program in a given community, country? How does this ensure the program is regenerative? And I have one more question for you. How does IFAD ensure school feeding resilience against climate, water shortage, or seasonal production changes? So, three-part question there.
Great. Thank you so much for inviting us. We're talking about school meals that make me feel very, very hungry, actually. I'm going to start with the supply chain. If we're thinking about school meals, we need to think about the consistency of the supply chain. And when you add climate shocks to the supply chain, you have massive disruption. And if you have disruption, the result is fairly straightforward. It's increase in price. So that is a kind of a starting point. Now, if we want to stabilize this, we obviously need to focus much more on climate resilience of that supply chain, but that requires financing. And so far, for the last 5 days, I've been hearing a lot about financing, the need for financing, 1.3 trillion US dollars, but we are not necessarily talking sufficiently about the quality of the finance. And Simon, you're mentioning about the predictability, and predictability is one of the criteria for the quality of that financing. We are not necessarily looking into the purpose of that climate finance, what it is supposed to be used for, and what would be the consequent impact. So the predictability is not necessarily there. We're also not using the government's systems and processes to channel some of this financing in order to ensure more predictability when it comes to the fiscal situation of the government. So I think that predictability is important. The quality of climate finance, not only just school meal program, but for any program is absolutely critical. What is IFAD doing? I mean, IFAD is only one single organization, and we cannot necessarily cover every single layer of interventions that you require before you produce that school meal and before you procure this. But we are trying our best. I mean, what we do is essentially we have our own financing from the balance sheet, and that is concessional loan. We don't necessarily provide grant because we don't have enough grant to provide. But what we do is we try to blend that concessional financing with supplementary financing that comes from GCF, GF, and Adaptation Fund. And when you are blending the grant and concessional loan, you improve the package for the developing country in terms of the interest rate. But we are also borrowing from the marketplace. We have borrowed almost $1 billion US dollars. And we actually have placed a bond, a private placement, that focuses on nutrition. So these are the kind of instruments that we are looking into. Concessional financing is important, grant is important, and also borrowing from the marketplace is important. That gives you the interest coming from the private sector, that they want to take the risk to invest in nutrition. Of course, this risk is covered through the guarantee that IFAD can provide. So those are some of the financing options. Now, what are we doing with this financing? Now, if you think about the supply chain, you're thinking about various intervention points, starting from climate resilient seeds distribution, water infrastructure, irrigation facilities, solar pumps that Simon was mentioning. But those are some of the production aspect. I think it's very important for us to move to also the midstream and the marketing and the supply aspect. Here we are talking about storage facilities, right? I mean, 30% of the food gets wasted because we cannot store them. So storage facility for us is very important. Packaging is important. Value addition is important. Transportation is important. But what we are trying to do across the value chain, and Simon was talking about it, is we are trying to reduce the distance between the production and the market. So you can think about local solutions, local production, local customers, and thereby you are also reducing the GHG emission. Yeah, because the transportation cost and the distance is actually going down. So these are some of the interventions. The question is, what criteria do we actually use? There are a few criteria. One is we want to ensure that there is persistent and consistent supply that's available. And if it's not available, what can we actually do to build the capacity of that supply chain? That's one. Government commitment is incredibly important. We can talk about school meal program as long as we want to, but if there's no commitment coming from the government side, especially in developing countries, 84% of school meal program is actually financed through national budget and local resources. That's 84%. A majority of this is through public procurement. So if the government doesn't necessarily have a nutrition strategy or a procurement policy that can incentivize the school meal program, then we have a major problem. Then the third one is sustainability of it. I mean, IFAD is not going to be there forever. It's only a loan package for few years, but what happens after that? Who is going to be taking care of this responsibility? Are we actually sending the consistent and persistent market signal to the private sector? Are we getting sufficient attention from the private sector? And I think the answer is yes, of course. There's business opportunity when it comes to transportation, solar energy, buyers and sellers. I mean, these are all private sector actors pretty much. The question is, how do you then aggregate in order to make it much more exciting for the private sector? So that's important for us. We try to link regenerative agriculture with school meal program. The question then is there sufficient potential for us to make a difference? So those are some of the criteria that we use. And your last question was about what's missing. You know, what is missing? I think first thing that is missing is sufficient financing. But I think if we consider outcome-based financing, then perhaps there will be a little more interest. Yeah? So you are tying this financing with the results. And that's what we all want to see. So I think there is tremendous potential for outcome-based financing. There's also tremendous potential for better sectoral coordination. That is not necessarily happening. Again, there are multiple ministries that are involved. You have Ministry of Education, you have Ministry of Agriculture, you have Ministry of Trade. All of these ministries are involved. So can we ensure that there's better coordination? And the last thing, and this is our key message across the board for COP30, is we need to focus much more on the numbers, yeah, in terms of the impact. I mean, think about a school meal program. It can increase school enrollment by 9%. If you think about women, it can increase the enrollment by 12% just for girls' education. It can save household costs by 10%. It can save $200 billion US when it comes to health-related costs in the future. Regenerative agriculture itself can provide additional school meal to 7.8 million kids without adding any cost. If you're thinking about school meal program, you're thinking about $1 investment for an economic return of between 7 to 35%. I think there are numbers are there, but are we communicating these numbers enough to the finance ministries and to the investors? So that would be kind of another area where we can see school meal program not only as a social intervention, but it is an economic intervention with a return potential. Thank you.
Yeah, and join me in applauding him. So thank you so much for that. Like a lot of good stuff, Jahan. You started with the quality of the financing. I think, that's, kind of creating that arc for your conversation was very, very helpful. And then you delved into the different components. And the one that stuck out to me was the importance of how actually locally led efforts are better for the environment. For some reason, that just really stuck out to me, right? At the end of the day, and then you landed the plane with the fact that actually regenerative efforts around agriculture, you can reap off of that to feed more children, right? So that means that's more kids in schools, more productive adults, and then the component around de-risking the environment for, frankly, the public and private sector, considering that IFAD, you operate in the rural parts of the world, is very, very transformative as well, because we all know that, especially with the private sector, they don't want to go there if the money is not there or if they're going to lose their money, etc. I mean, it's just the way the private sector operates, and I appreciate that because it also helps to drive productivity, ROI and so on. But that point around the important role that IFAD is playing in de-risking the environment for regenerative agriculture, I think is transformative. And your point around the importance of communicating the ROI is not lost on me. And so just wanted to thank you for your intervention in that regard related to the financial aspects of regenerative agriculture writ large and also school meals particularly. So as we're kind of wrapping up our conversation together, this is for all of my panelists, and I'm so glad that we made it through. We haven't melted yet, notwithstanding the hot weather. Ultimately, and Arlene, I'd love for you to come in on here, and then I'll kick it over to Yukiko, and then I'll have you, Simon, and then Jahan, Zeb, I want you to help us land the plane. So ultimately, how can school feeding programs become more climate resilient, and what further innovations are needed to sustain them?
Well, another big question for us. I think I come back to transportation as being a neglected area. We're still building roads that crumble, 2 years down the road. We're still flying planes that are really damaging the environment. And the trucking systems and shipping systems are really broken. And so I think basically school meal programs are on track, and I think we're all doing really well at making the case for links to the environment, links to smallholder farmers, links to the economy, creating jobs, educating people that we need to become healthy parents of healthy, educated children. But we are neglecting things like talking to each other and collaborating, and this core issue of transport. Whether you're talking 5 kilometers or 5,000 kilometers, we need more climate-friendly systems for transport. We can't do away with moving food if we're going to feed hungry people. And it's at such a cost to the environment, it needs to be fixed. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Arlene. Yukiko?
Thank you so much. As Arlene was mentioning, I think children can be great agents of change, because I think their voices do make a difference, because we do have these community-led solutions of regenerative agriculture led in the community, kitchen gardens, school gardens, and capacity building with the teachers and nutrition staff. But for me, it was a good learning to listen to you that we really have to speak up these numbers and think about the macro level. So how we can connect these different stakeholders at different levels. So I think we are even more committed now that how we can raise their voices and community-based solutions at the more sort of macro policy levels, and to engage with the different stakeholders across different ministries. Thank you.
Great, thanks. I think I'd say three things. One is context-driven development approaches. Yes, we want those supply chains or value chains to be as short as possible, but we want things happening in the right way at the right levels. You want your national policies, for sure. You want some technologies, could be solar voltaics, for example, coming in from further away, but you want that real smallholder farmer shortened connection through to skills. So context-driven approaches. Secondly, I think this aggregator model, so we know we're not going to get tiny investments at the scale that we need. So aggregation, I think that's kind of a takeaway or a real opportunity. And then thirdly, Jahan, to your point, I think there's a huge opportunity here to stimulate further awareness of, if we get the numbers, if we get the metrics right, your kind of outcomes-based financing, well, wow, there's massive, deep, impressive metrics out there about your improvements in GDP through children going on through education, yeah? If we can really quantify that, then you open up a host of opportunities around outcomes-based financing, perhaps linked to debt swaps or other instruments. So drilling down on the metrics, raising awareness of the opportunity, and then pulling together strategies on the back of that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Jab?
Mine?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I want to focus on one particular innovation, and we haven't worked on it, but something that we are thinking about, and that is looking towards the market. What are those instruments that are out there that can incentivize the small-scale farmers? And the obvious one is carbon market. Yeah, regenerative agriculture has potential for generating the credit. Simon, you were talking about dairy. That also means that if you're going for efficient, let's say, pasture management system, or grazing, or feed optimization, you're reducing methane in the air. And methane is one of the best quality carbon credit that you can actually get. And if you think about the carbon market, less than 5% of the credit that is being generated through methane reduction. So there is tremendous potential. So the question then is it possible for us to generate the credit through the school meal program, aggregate them, and then trade this in the marketplace that can be redirected to the small-scale farmers, almost like an incentive-based payment mechanism. So that is one idea. I'm sure there are many other ideas, but that's something that I wanted to focus on. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for that. For those of us who are like data geeks, I was just geeking out on that, right? I think, so thank you. So as we're wrapping up, and I do want you all to go around with one last word of hope. I always want our panelists to have the last bite of the apple. But I just wanted to highlight some of the key points that we've talked about today. So in this session, we learned the innovative ways that organizations make school meals nutritious while advancing climate and development goals. So that was one thing we accomplished. But we also see that there is a lot of potential for school meals to present a holistic opportunity to achieve multiple sustainable development goals in a cost-effective way. It's a clear win. It's a no-brainer, school meals, from where I sit, because as we know, for every dollar invested in school meals, studies show that there's a yield of $3 to $9 return on investment. As speakers, love to hear your call to action. It could be as it relates to improving school feeding, as a climate and nutrition solution. It can also be as it relates to COP30 and the negotiations that are happening right now. So over to you all in sort of your last word of hope. And Arlene, I'll give you the first bite at the apple again.
Yeah, I think the ray of hope is that governments around the world are really waking up to how important an investment school feeding is. And we need to be listening to them and creating partnerships that haven't existed in the past. I think we've had some examples of those, both existing partnerships and the need for partnerships going forward. I think because of the change in financing environment, it's going to force better collaboration and cooperation. And with countries leading the way, I think we have a lot of hope for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Harleen. Yukiko?
So we were very excited about the Belen Declaration on hunger and poverty and child-centered approach in climate change. But as we all know, declaration tends to stay as a goodwill. So how that would link to Sharm el-Sheikh work program on food systems. And also we are also advocating for expert dialogues on children so that their voices on school meals would come to the real policy dialogues, and that would be taken into more financing agreement and sustainable agri-food systems. So that would be my hope for the upcoming BOM working programs, and also more uptake of Belen Declaration, that it doesn't stay as a goodwill statement, but it will come together with the actual action. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Good job.
Yeah, great. So I take quite a bit of hope away, actually. And Arlene, I'm just going to underscore what you said. Government-led, governments taking ownership, and coalitions of governments coming together. I think that's giving me tremendous hope. Secondly, I think the technologies and the affordability and some movement around inclusivity of access to technology, whether it's your, solar systems or your ability to kind of capture or verify your methane emissions, the technologies and the acceleration in the technology space gives me some hope. And then thirdly, I think it's the financial instruments that are increasingly in existence. We just need to get them to be harnessed better. So acceleration needed, but I take some hope that we are going to accelerate. COP of action, right?
Yes, of course. Thank you.
Thank you. Your question reminded me of a line from Shawshank Redemption. Hope is the only thing that keeps us alive, right? I think there's a lot to already celebrate. If you look at the number, 2024, I think almost 500 million kids had access to school meal program. Yes, majority of them were in developed countries, but we are also seeing a trend of increasing access in developing countries. That's 20% more than what we had seen in 2021. That's 20% more. So the movement has already started, and I can sense that there is a lot of tailwind. And it's important for us, while things are not necessarily going fully in alignment with our targets, we are making progress. And it's important for us to take a break and celebrate that progress. Thank you.
Thank you. And what gives me hope is the 14-year-old girl in a refugee camp in northeastern Nigeria who, because of school meals programs, was not only being fed but wanted to become a doctor. I couldn't imagine her situation. She didn't have her parents, but because of school meals programs run by the World Food Program, she was able to dream. She was able to have hope. And that story stays with me, even though it's been almost 10 years now. And that's what keeps fueling me in this work around school meals. So audience, please join me in thanking our wonderful panelists. Arlene? Are you able to get on camera so we can take a quick picture?